Oh, holy cow, it's almost January 17th, and there's a new set releasing for the Pokemon TCG. And if you've been following the news about this set, it almost sounds like people are going to be fighting in the streets to get their hands on Prismatic Evolution booster packs. But wait, before you run out and sacrifice your firstborn to get your hand on some of these packs, please watch this video because there's probably a lot of confusion about what's actually in these boosters. And if you're someone like me who is mostly only interested in playing with the cards in decks rather than just collecting them to sit in binders, the set is actually kind of low-key terrible. And if you would be way better off snatching up the cheap singles and the few new cards in the set and let the collector crowd fight over the packs trying to find those secret rares, alt arts, and evolutions. But now that we have the actual set list for the English Prismatic Evolutions, rather than just the Japanese set list for the Terrestrial Festival set, I'm here to give you guys the facts about what's in Prismatic Evolution that's new and interesting, so you can decide if it's worth buying packs or just picking up singles. So, in lieu of a full proper set review, here is your player's buy list guide to all the new cards found in the Prismatic Evolution set. And yes, this will be mostly focused on the Gym Leader Challenge format, but I'll mention the cards and cuts that were relevant for Standard as well, at least briefly. So yeah, if you didn't know, Prismatic Evolutions is actually like 95% reprints or so, and a lot of them, and just a handful of cards in the set are actually new to the game. And a lot of those are actually cards from starter decks that aren't really powerful enough to really impact the competitive side of the game. First up, I want to talk about some of the prominent cards that we thought were going to be in the set that actually got cut from the English release. And this includes cards like Blaziken EX, Lilligant, and Toadscroll, which all have been cut and are not going to be in the set and are going to be in a later release for English players. For standard players, there are two important new cards that are not really relevant for GLC, so I'll just mention them here. That is Regigigas for the Lugia standard decks, and then Black Belt's Practice, which, if you're like me, you may have overlooked that this card only works against EX Pokemon, so not relevant for GLC, but could be important in standard format. Now I'm going to quickly go over some of the vanilla evolving basics in the set that will be small optimization upgrades for many decks before we get into the more important new cards for GLC. There is a Sneasel with free retreat cost. Sadly, it only has 60 HP, ideally it would have 70, but my guess is most players will still want the free retreat more for that. This new Houndour is technically the new best Houndour for those of you trying to make the single strike deck work in GLC. There is a new Houndoom that has a built-in TM Turbo Energize type attack for 1 energy, but you really want that sort of attack on a basic Pokemon, and it doesn't deal enough damage to really justify it being used as a stage 1 in GLC. This Bronzor is the first one available with 70 HP and 1 retreat cost, which makes it worth considering. There's a Bronzong here that gives your team a 10 damage reduction, but there's just so many cards in Metal that do this better, and this really just can't compete with the Metal Lynx Bronzong in GLC. I thought this Heatran was worth mentioning as it has the exact same attack and 10 more HP as the Zacian from Paradox Rift, with the Brave Blade attack for 130, which is seeing more play lately in Metal decks, and often in decks that don't run the Brilliant Stars Fire Energy Heatran. But 130 HP isn't really an important breakpoint over 120 HP. And I think the first attack on Zacian for 1 energy that accelerates energy and deals chip damage is going to make it the better choice in most cases. Then we have Roto Stick, which I haven't really seen many people talking about, but mostly because it's kind of just a bad poke gear, grabbing a supporter from the top 4 instead of 7. The upside is that you do get to keep all the supporters you find there and put them into your hand instead of just one. But sadly, I think that number will most likely be 0 when you play this, so probably not going to see a lot of use. Alright, now we're getting into the cards that are actually interesting for GLC, and we'll start with the more broadly applicable cards and work our way down to the more niche and narrow cards, although this list is pretty short. Starting off with trainers, we have Amaris, which is a supporter, possibly the game's first unconditional draw 4 card supporter, without any preconditions for playing the card. This might seem boring at first, but just drawing 4 cards straight up can be really useful to decks that might be lacking in draw power, like fighting, grass, and darkness decks. However, the catch here is that if you have 5 or more cards in your hand when your turn ends, you have to discard them. So you want to have ways to either play out the cards in your hand or maybe discard them to make sure you don't lose everything, which probably makes this card not so great in grass decks where your hand can sometimes get clogged up with evolutions. Just hope you don't draw into a bunch of supporter cards with this and you'll be fine. Then we have Larry's Professionalism, which for the cost of discarding your hand up front, lets you get any Pokemon, any one basic energy, and any one supporter from your deck and put them into your hand. So very similar to Peony, but one of the cards you get can't be played in the same turn, which is kind of annoying. But you can just tutor up a draw supporter for your next turn to refill your hand that you just discarded. It also gets better in decks that have an ability that can refill their hand with cards such as Octillery and Bibarel. This currently has to compete with Peony and Professor's Research in terms of cards that make you discard your entire hand, but this card definitely has potential, and I'll be keeping my eyes on it for sure. Next up, we have the card that is currently warping the standard format around it in Japan, Itchy Pollen Bedew. A new baby Pokemon with 30 HP, free retreat, and a 0 energy attack that deals 10 damage and shuts down the opponent's items during their turn. It's already probably been talked about to death for its impact on the standard format, but in GLC its impact will likely be much more modest for a couple of reasons. For one, it can only be played in a grass deck and not just in any deck, like in standard, where the 0 attack cost makes it possible to play it in any deck. But also, losing a prize to this thing is a much bigger issue in GLC than in standard. In standard, this thing doesn't really fit into the 2-2-2 prize map of most standard decks. But in GLC, you're generally taking prizes one at a time. So 1-1-1, 1-1-1. And so Bedew just becomes another prize card for your opponent on the way to their victory. But I can see it being tested in grass decks as a pivot and to slow down the opponent's early game while the grass deck gets their evolutions into play. Although this does kind of get in the way of using TM evolution, which a lot of grass decks like to use. But the cool thing about this is it's not an ability, so opponents can't get around this with something like Hex Maniac or Guzma the way that they can against a card like Trevenant. And the only way to turn off the effect of this is with something like Pokemon Ranger, which most decks are just not playing. And then the last card I'm going to be talking about is the new Festival Lead Seaking. This is part of the Festival Grounds archetype in Standard, but currently it is the only water Pokemon that cares about Festival Grounds along with Goldeen. If Festival Grounds Stadium is in play, you can effectively attack for 120 damage total and draw 4 cards in total, all for just 1 colorless energy, which is pretty cool. And it does multiply the bonus from damage boosting cards like Muscle Band, so you could get up to 160 damage with the Muscle Band. Though it also multiplies damage reduction effects on things like Hot Helmet and Whale Lord, so that would be a problem. But because of, also another problem is that because of how the ability is worded, you can't attack twice with a technical machine, which would have been really cool with something like TM Crisis Punch or Technical Machine Blindside. With no other cards in water to pair with the Festival Grounds, I think the Seaking is probably a little too gimmicky to build a reliable strategy around. One way that we have seen the Festival Grounds Stadium make its way into decks in GLC, though, is alongside the Thumping Snorlax in colorless decks to prevent it from falling asleep when it attacks, which can allow it to sweep games without too much difficulty from not having to wake up from sleep, and still being able to equip something like a Luxurious Cape, since you're not using something like a wind-up arm as your tool. But sadly, water doesn't really have anything similar to Snorlax that can do big damage while afflicting itself with a status condition. So for now, I think the Seaking will have to wait for another viable synergy piece to come along to go with it. So yeah, that's it. There's hardly any interesting new cards in this set, to be honest. And they're mostly just commons and uncommons, so they shouldn't be too hard to find. Hopefully, if you're a player looking for some clarity on what new cards are going to be in Prismatic Evolutions, now you've got a better grasp on the set and whether it's worth it to risk life and limb to try and get a few of these packs. For me, Amaris and Badoo are pretty much the only cards in the set that I'm interested in, and the rest of it can just wait until the Pokemon Company figures out its printing issues and this set gets restocked. Happy hunting, everybody, and remember to be kind to each other. Even if you're on the hunt for these elusive booster packs, it's not worth giving up your humanity over. And if you want to see more content, make sure to like the video so other people see it, and subscribe, and you can get notified of new videos by clicking on the bell icon. Thanks, everybody. See you later.